Welcome to Whispers in the Dark. Imagine hearing the eerie sound of children's cries coming from a distant cornfield, only to discover a twisted scarecrow stalking the edges of your property. As night falls, you realize the sinister creatures lurking in the shadows aren't from this world. You can feel it, something dark is waiting, and it's not going away. Don't forget to subscribe to Whispers in the Dark to support the channel and keep the chilling tales coming. Megan Adams had always dreamed of a life less cluttered, one without the suffocating hum of city traffic and the never-ending deadline chase. As a struggling freelance artist, the overwhelming pressure of her daily life had started to suffocate her. What once was a passion for painting had turned into an exhausting routine. Desperate for a change, Megan came across a job listing that seemed to be exactly what she needed. It was simple, a caretaking position at a remote farm in Salem, Oregon. The pay was good, the work was straightforward, and most importantly, it promised an escape from the chaos of city life. She needed space to breathe, to think, to create again. The idea of a quiet, isolated farm nestled at the foot of the Wallowa Mountains filled her with a sense of calm. The thought of vast open fields, the fresh scent of pine trees, and the silence, disturbed only by the occasional rustling of leaves or the distant cry of a bird, was the kind of peace Megan craved. The farm was a 3-hour drive from Portland, located in an area that felt as though it belonged to another world, shrouded in mist and dense forest, hidden away from the prying eyes of the city. It was perfect. When she arrived in Salem, the drive had already begun to wear on her nerves. As she ventured further into the outskirts of the town, the road narrowed and twisted, veiled in thick fog that seemed to seep out from the towering trees, almost as if the forest itself was breathing around her. The sun was setting, casting long, sharp shadows across the road, and Megan felt a tinge of unease settle deep in her stomach. The air grew heavier with every mile she drove, the quiet oppressive, as though the very earth beneath her wheels was holding its breath. The farmhouse came into view as she rounded a bend. It was far more rustic than she had imagined. Perched on the edge of a thick forest with the mountains looming in the distance like silent, watchful sentinels, the place seemed to sag with age, its walls covered in ivy, the roof slightly crooked as though it had borne the weight of too many years. Despite its dilapidated appearance, there was something strangely inviting about it. The porch light flickered and a small plume of smoke rose from the chimney, curling lazily into the dimming sky. It was the kind of place that spoke of isolation, of a life lived slowly, far from the rush of the modern world. Megan parked her car and stepped out, the chill of the evening air wrapping around her like a blanket. As she approached the door, it creaked open, revealing an elderly couple, Mr. and Mrs. Grafton. They both had an air of weariness about them, their movements slow but deliberate. Mr. Grafton was tall and thin, with sharp features, his skin weathered like old leather. Mrs. Grafton, on the other hand, was shorter, with a rounded face that seemed perpetually frozen in a gentle, almost serene smile, though her eyes were distant and sad. Their presence was kind, but there was something about them, something Megan couldn't place, that made her skin crawl ever so slightly. "Welcome, welcome, Mr. Grafton said in a voice that cracked like dry wood. "You must be Megan. I trust you had a good journey." "Yes, thank you," Megan replied, though she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about the couple. There was an old-fashioned warmth to their demeanor, but beneath it, a coldness lingered, like a shadow in the corner of her vision. Mrs. Grafton led her inside, offering her tea and settling her into a chair by the fire. The warmth of the room felt comforting, though Megan noticed the heavy smell of wood smoke in the air, as if the house itself had been suffocating in isolation for years. As she sipped the tea, she couldn't help but glance around, her eyes catching odd details. Framed photographs on the walls, their subjects always posed unnaturally. Old wooden furniture that looked as though it had seen too many years of use. But it was the list of rules that they handed her that truly unsettled her. The Graftons had prepared a long list of instructions, detailing everything she needed to know about her role on the farm. Some were practical, such as feeding the animals at precise times and ensuring the irrigation system was working properly. But others were stranger. Rule number 1, Mr. Grafton said, reading from the list. You must feed the goats and chickens at 6:00 a.m. sharp. They get very cranky if you're late. Megan nodded, trying to suppress the unease that was creeping up her spine. Rule number 2, he continued, prune the raspberry patch carefully. Be sure to remove the floricanes, the old canes that have already fruited. Wear thick gloves, for they have sharp thorns. Mrs. Grafton, who had been sitting quietly by the fire, spoke up in a soft, almost reverent tone. If you get pricked, head inside immediately and call Dr. Livy. He'll make sure the wound doesn't get infected. He's very good with those sorts of things. Megan raised an eyebrow, the absurdity of the request gnawing at her. Who were these people? Why were they so specific about things like this? Mr. Grafton didn't seem to notice her growing discomfort. He continued reading, each rule more peculiar than the last. Rule number 3. If you ever see a sunflower that isn't facing the same direction as the others, you must leave the field immediately and don't return until the next day. Rule number 4. Do not enter the woods, especially after dark. There are coyotes, wild animals, and other things in there. The pens are secure, but the woods are not. At this, Megan felt a flicker of unease in her chest. The mention of other things was unsettling, but she didn't want to appear rude by asking what exactly he meant. She scribbled down the instructions, trying to seem absorbed in the task. Rule number 5, do not enter the old barn. It is off limits. We've had incidents before. Mr. Grafton's voice faltered slightly at this, and Megan glanced up at him, but his face was unreadable. Rule number 6, if you hear any noises in the barn or the woods at night, ignore them. It's nothing. The animals sometimes make strange sounds. Megan's hands gripped the list tightly. Strange sounds. What kind of animals could make noises that weren't of this world? The rules seemed to go on forever, each more bizarre than the last. Megan's head was swimming with the oddness of it all, but she was too polite to argue. Besides, the pay was good, and the isolation from the city was exactly what she needed. Still, the longer she stayed in that house, the more the atmosphere seemed to settle like a heavy fog around her. As the evening wore on, Megan retired to her room, the unsettling weight of the rules lingering in the back of her mind. She lay in bed, staring up at the wooden beams above her. The room was quiet, too quiet. The only sound was the occasional creak of the house settling. She pulled the thick blankets up around her shoulders, but sleep did not come easily. Then, just as she was about to drift off, she heard it, a soft whisper. It was faint at first, almost like the wind, but Megan could swear she heard words, faint and indistinct. She sat up, straining to listen. The whispering grew louder, coming from outside, from the direction of the woods. Her heart raced. She told herself it was just the wind, that she was imagining things. But deep down, something told her that whatever it was not natural. Megan closed her eyes tightly, trying to calm her nerves. "It's nothing," she repeated in her mind over and over. "Just the wind." But the whispering didn't stop. The first night, Megan Adams lay in the narrow bed, the blanket pulled tightly around her shoulders as if it could protect her from the unease that had settled over the farm. The house, though warm, felt like it was alive in its silence. There was an odd stillness to everything here, an oppressive quiet that made her nerves hum with tension. The chirping of insects outside had stopped just as the sun dipped behind the mountains, and the trees were motionless, their dark shapes looming like sentinels in the distance. The only sounds that filled the room were the faint creaks of the old wood beams and the muffled rhythm of her own heartbeat. Megan had tried to settle into the small room after dinner, but the weight of the strange rules still hung over her like a dark cloud. She had tucked the list of instructions into her bag, almost feeling guilty for taking them too seriously. They were, after all, just precautions, she told herself. But the more she thought about them, the more they seemed like an omen. The bed felt too large for one person, too empty. Megan turned on her side, staring out the small window. The glow of the porch light was just visible in the distance, casting a weak yellow hue across the lawn. It was peaceful in a way, but it also felt like a place trapped in time, suspended in some forgotten era. Her eyelids grew heavy and sleep began to claim her, but it didn't come easily. Suddenly she was jolted awake by a sound. It was faint at first, a scratching noise. She sat up, heart hammering in her chest. The room was dark, save for the pale sliver of moonlight creeping in through the window. The scratching continued, louder now, as if something was dragging itself across the walls, the sound scraping like claws on stone. Megan's breath caught in her throat. She held her breath, straining to hear the noise. It was coming from the corner of the room near the window. She swung her legs off the bed, her feet cold against the wooden floor. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was in the room with her. But when she reached the corner and flicked the light switch, the room was empty. There was no sign of anything unusual, no shadow, no movement. Just the quiet, the oppressive silence. Her pulse raced, her mind playing tricks on her. It was probably just the house settling, she reasoned, or perhaps a tree branch brushing against the window in the wind. But something gnawed at her, a deep, instinctual sense that there was more to it than that. She stood there for a moment, heart still pounding in her chest, before she slowly returned to the bed. She pulled the blankets tighter around her, trying to ignore the feeling of eyes on her. The silence in the room was too thick now, suffocating. Her mind raced with thoughts of the strange rules the Graftons had given her, the whispers of the animals, the shadow in the woods. And then, just as she was about to drift off again, she saw it. A shadow moved at the edge of the window. Megan's eyes snapped open and she sat up straight, her heart skipping a beat. She looked toward the window, but there was nothing there, just the darkness, the fog that rolled in from the forest and the dim light outside. Her breath caught in her throat, and for a moment she couldn't tell if she had imagined it or if it had been real. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something had been watching her. With a quiet exhale, she laid back down, forcing herself to close her eyes. But sleep did not come easily that night. Uneasy discoveries. The next morning, Megan woke early, long before the rooster crowed. The sun had just begun to rise, casting a pale light over the land. The air was cool and damp, and the earth smelled earthy, fresh. She stretched in the bed, pushing away the remnants of the unsettling dreams that had clung to her mind like cobwebs. She decided to take a walk around the farm to clear her head. The Graftons had gone to town, and the silence of the place felt even more profound in their absence. She pulled on a jacket and stepped outside, the cold morning air biting her skin as she made her way to the barn. As she walked across the fields, she couldn't help but feel a sense of wonder at the beauty of the place. The Wallowa Mountains loomed in the distance, their jagged peaks dusted with snow. The fog rolled in slowly from the dense woods, swallowing the farm in a soft, ethereal haze. It was peaceful here, in the way only isolation could make a person feel. Yet there was something off about it, something that lingered just beneath the surface. Her footsteps crunched on the dry grass as she ventured further into the property. She had been told to avoid the woods, and part of her wanted to follow the rules, to respect the boundaries the Graftons had set. But as she walked along the edge of the property, something caught her eye, a dilapidated building in the distance. It was an old house, half hidden by the overgrowth of trees and vines. The windows were broken and the roof was caving in as if the house had been abandoned for decades. Megan's curiosity got the better of her. She pushed through the thick brush and walked toward the house, the wooden planks of the porch creaking beneath her feet. It felt wrong, the kind of wrong that makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. The house was eerie in its decay, as though it had been forgotten by time itself. The door hung loosely on its hinges, and as Megan reached for it, she hesitated. The air around her felt dense, the silence unnerving. She pushed the door open with a soft creak, revealing a dark interior. The air smelled musty, thick with the scent of rotting wood and damp earth. Megan took a step inside, her footfall echoing through the empty space. The floor was covered in dust, and the walls were lined with peeling wallpaper. Old furniture sat abandoned in the corners, its surfaces thick with grime. But it was the cellar door that caught her attention. It was locked, but there was something about it, something that made her feel as though it was hiding something far darker. Before she could investigate further, a sharp voice broke through the silence. "Megan, what are you doing here?" It was Mrs. Grafton, standing at the edge of the yard, her face stern and her eyes narrow. Megan froze, guilt washing over her like a cold wave. Mrs. Grafton's expression softened slightly as she walked toward her. "You're not supposed to go near this house," Mrs. Grafton said, her voice low and serious. "It's dangerous. It's part of the land's history. People have disappeared here." Megan's heart skipped a beat. "Disappeared?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. She could feel it in the air, a presence, something ancient and unsettling. Mrs. Grafton nodded gravely. "The previous caretaker. He went missing under strange circumstances. We've been through this before. Don't make the same mistake." Megan nodded, backing away from the house. The fear in Mrs. Grafton's eyes was enough to silence any further questions. The animal's behavior. Megan returned to the main house, her mind swirling with the strange warning. As she approached the barn to feed the goats and chickens, she noticed something unsettling, an odd stillness among the animals. The goats were clustered together, their wide eyes following her every movement. They didn't seem afraid, not like normal animals. They were watching her, almost studying her, their eyes too intelligent for comfort. The chickens, too, seemed off. They gathered around her in a tight circle, their heads bobbing up and down as they pecked at the ground. But it wasn't their behavior that disturbed Megan. It was the strange clucking sounds they made, almost as if they were whispering, as if the sounds were words, garbled, indecipherable whispers. "Strange," Megan muttered under her breath, trying to shake the feeling that the animals were more than they appeared. But when she reached the goat pen, one of the goats, the black and white one with the strange, piercing eyes, stepped forward, its gaze unblinking. It stared at her for a long, uncomfortable moment before letting out a low bleat, almost like a warning. She swallowed hard, stepping back. There was something wrong with these animals, something that didn't belong, something that made the farm feel less like a peaceful retreat and more like a place out of time, where rules and reality no longer made sense. As the animals continued to stare, Megan turned quickly and left the pen, her heart pounding in her chest. The unease that had been lurking in the back of her mind was now fully awake, its claws digging into her thoughts. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched by something far more sinister than the Graftons or the animals. And as the sun began to dip below the horizon, Megan knew something was very wrong on this farm. Something dark was stirring in the woods, and it was only a matter of time before it found her. The sunflower rule. The days on the Grafton farm passed slowly, each one blending into the next. Megan became accustomed to the rhythmic tasks of farm life, feeding the animals, tending to the crops, and following the strange, unspoken rules set forth by Mr. and Mrs. Grafton. The work was hard, but it was a welcome distraction from the unsettling thoughts that had begun to gnaw at her. She had always been a solitary person, but this level of isolation felt different. It was as if the land itself had a pulse, and it was beating in sync with her own growing anxiety. The sunflowers, however, were always the most striking feature of the farm. Megan had been warned about them from the very first day. Never go into the sunflower field during the late afternoon, Mr. Grafton had told her, his voice firm. They are sensitive, and they act as guardians of the land. It's best not to disturb them when the sun is low. Megan had nodded at the time, dismissing it as just another one of the Grafton's strange quirks. But as the days wore on, her curiosity grew. There was something unnerving about the sunflowers, something that tugged at her consciousness whenever she passed the field. They were beautiful in a way, tall, their golden heads turning toward the sun, always perfectly aligned. But their stillness, their unyielding gaze made them feel wrong. There was no breeze that caused their petals to sway, no casual movement that indicated their true nature. It was as if they were watching her, waiting for something. She spent her days on the farm, keeping busy with her chores, but always making sure to stay well clear of the sunflower field. The Grafton's rules were clear. Stay away when the sun was low. She adhered to them with the same diligence that she followed every other instruction. But one evening, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, Megan found herself drawn to the edge of the field. It wasn't something she intended to do, but her steps seemed to carry her there, as if the sunflowers themselves were calling to her. She walked slowly, her boots crunching against the dry earth, her mind strangely focused on the flowers. The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows over the farm, and the light had an eerie quality to it. The golden petals of the sunflowers glowed faintly, as if lit from within. She stopped at the edge of the field, her breath catching in her throat. Something was different. One of the sunflowers, the one closest to her, was no longer facing the sun. Instead, its dark center was staring straight at her, its petals bent unnaturally, almost as though they had been twisted by an unseen hand. Megan felt a chill crawl up her spine, but she couldn't move. She stood there, frozen, staring at the flower. The wind had stopped completely, and the air was unnervingly still. For a moment, she thought she saw something shift in the flower's dark center. A flicker of movement, perhaps, or the shadow of something deep within the petals. But when she blinked, it was gone, leaving only the same unnerving stillness. Megan took a hesitant step back, but something stopped her. It was as if the sunflower's gaze was holding her in place, not allowing her to leave. The longer she stood there, the more she felt the weight of the field pressing in on her, the silent presence of hundreds of flowers watching her every move. Then, with a sudden rush of breath, Megan turned and walked briskly back to the farmhouse. She couldn't shake the feeling that she had just crossed some invisible line, that she had seen something she wasn't supposed to see. Strange phenomena. The next morning, Megan tried to dismiss the unsettling experience. She focused on her chores, throwing herself into the work with an intensity that bordered on desperation. But the sunflowers were never far from her thoughts. As the days passed, Megan couldn't help but notice something strange about the field. The sunflowers were growing rapidly. Their stalks thickened each day, twisting and curling like serpents, their heads tipping higher and higher toward the sky. It wasn't just the rate of growth that unsettled her. It was the way the flowers seemed to be reaching for something. The way they shifted in the breeze as if they were trying to move, to break free from their roots. And then there were the sounds. At night, when the world outside was still and quiet, Megan would hear it, a low hum emanating from the direction of the sunflower field. At first, she thought it was just the wind or perhaps the distant cry of an animal. But the hum persisted, a steady vibration that seemed to resonate from deep within the earth. It wasn't just a sound. It was a sensation, a pressure in the air that made her skin prickle and her heartbeat race. The first time she heard it clearly, she was sitting in the kitchen, the dim light of the lantern casting long shadows across the room. The hum was faint at first, a low, almost imperceptible vibration that she could feel more than hear. It was as though the sound was coming from beneath the ground, deep within the earth itself. Megan stood up, her heart pounding, and moved to the window, pulling back the curtains just enough to peer outside. The field was shrouded in darkness, the sunflowers standing tall and still, their heads lowered as if in sleep. But the hum was still there, pulsing softly on the edges of her consciousness, beckoning her, drawing her in. Megan stood there for a long moment, her breath held in her chest as the hum grew louder, more insistent. It seemed to echo through the earth beneath her feet, vibrating in her bones. She wanted to look away, to shut the curtain and ignore it, but something held her there. Something deep within her, a voice she couldn't ignore, told her that she needed to see, that she needed to understand what was happening. With shaking hands, she pulled the curtain open wider, her gaze fixed on the sunflower field. For a moment, nothing moved. The flowers stood as still as they always had, their heads tilted toward the darkening sky. But then, just as she was about to turn away, she saw it, a figure standing at the far edge of the field, just barely visible in the dim light. It was a shadow, indistinct and wavering, as if it were part of the fog that clung to the ground. Megan's breath caught in her throat. The figure moved, but it was strange, unnerving. It didn't walk like a person, it glided, its movements jerky and unnatural, as if it were part of the darkness itself. Megan's heart pounded in her chest as the figure disappeared into the field, swallowed up by the dense rows of sunflowers. She wanted to scream, to run, but her body wouldn't move. The hum from the field continued, a low, undulating sound that seemed to rise and fall with the rhythm of her own breathing. It was as if the earth was alive, breathing with her, drawing her in. The figure never returned, but the hum continued, lingering in the back of her mind like a haunting melody she couldn't escape. As the days passed, the sunflowers continued to grow at an alarming rate. Their stalks became impossibly thick, and the heads of the flowers seemed to stretch toward the sky, always watching, always waiting. Megan could feel their presence even when she wasn't near them, as if they were following her every move. By day, the field was still, peaceful, even with the sunflowers standing in neat rows, their golden petals swaying in the breeze. But by night, the hum would return, a constant reminder that something was stirring beneath the earth. Something ancient, something hungry. Megan tried to ignore it, tried to focus on her tasks, but the farm was no longer a place of peace. It had become a place of dread where every shadow, every whisper in the wind seemed to carry a warning. The sunflowers weren't just plants, they were something else, something alive, and Megan knew deep in her gut that whatever lay beneath the soil, beneath the roots of those sunflowers, was beginning to awaken. And she was the one it was calling to. The cornfield rule. The Graftons had been clear. The cornfield was off limits. They had warned Megan more than once, but it wasn't the casual warnings of a typical employer. There was a weight to their words, something urgent and desperate in the way they spoke of it, like a curse that no one dared to talk about openly. The cornfield, tall and dark, stretching for acres, had been the focal point of their caution. But it wasn't just the field itself that they feared. It was the voices, the whispers that called to anyone who dared to listen. Megan had always dismissed their warnings, assuming they were just superstitions, old country tales meant to keep outsiders away. But over the course of her stay, those very same warnings began to gnaw at her mind. Each passing day on the farm, she could feel the pull of the cornfield growing stronger, its presence heavy in the air. The sunflowers seemed to grow more distant, their watchful eyes turned away, replaced by the oppressive silence that hung over the rows of corn. And then, one evening, as the last light of the day flickered out across the horizon, Megan heard it. It was faint at first, just a whisper, a soft sound carried on the evening breeze. But then it grew louder, more distinct, like the fragile cry of a child in distress carried through the swaying stalks. The voice was faint but unmistakable. "Mama, help me, please." The voice trembled, desperate, almost pleading. Megan's heart skipped a beat as she stood at the edge of the farm, looking toward the darkening cornfield. It was coming from within the rows, from somewhere deep inside. She had been warned not to go near it, especially not if she heard such a voice. But the pull, the compulsion to help, to make sure no child was truly lost, was overwhelming. Before she could think better of it, Megan found herself stepping into the field. As soon as her boots touched the soil, the air changed. The temperature dropped sharply, the once warm evening air now chilled, thick with the smell of damp earth and decay. The shadows between the corn stalks seemed to shift, stretching unnaturally long, as if they were alive, moving of their own accord. She could hear the rustling of the stalks, but it wasn't the wind. It was something else, something lurking within, something watching her. The deeper she walked into the field, the heavier the air grew, pressing down on her chest, making it harder to breathe. The whispering continued, the child's voice growing louder and more frantic, but now there was something else. A low, guttural sound beneath it, a rumble that seemed to come from the very earth. She hesitated for a moment, then pushed forward, her legs shaking beneath her, her heart racing. The corn stalks towered over her, their jagged leaves cutting the dim light as she passed. She could feel the weight of something unseen pressing against her, something ancient and malevolent buried deep within the soil, calling to her, drawing her closer to the center of the field. And then she saw it, a shadowy form standing at the center of the cornfield, barely visible through the thick layers of maize. The air around it seemed to warp, the space around it bending unnaturally. Megan's breath caught in her throat as the figure shifted, its form melting and contorting as though it were made of shadows and fog. It had no discernible shape, no clear body, but something in her gut told her it was not human. It moved toward her, faster than she could comprehend, its form twisting and curling in ways that defied logic. Megan spun on her heels, panic surging through her, but the field seemed to stretch forever, the rows of corn becoming a labyrinth, trapping her inside. She could hear the low hum beneath the earth growing louder, vibrating through her very bones. Something was coming, something from the depths of the earth, something that had been waiting for this moment. With a cry of terror, Megan stumbled backward, her legs tangling in the undergrowth. The figure lunged at her, but as it did, a gust of wind swept through the field, scattering the stalks around her. The figure vanished in an instant, as if it had never been there at all. Megan was left gasping for breath, her heart hammering in her chest, unable to make sense of what had just happened. She bolted out of the field, tripping over the corn that had once seemed so innocent, and ran back to the farmhouse. But even as she stumbled toward safety, she could feel its presence behind her, watching, waiting, the entity in the corn. That night, Megan couldn't sleep. The images of the shifting shadow, the rumble of the earth, and the child's voice echoed in her mind, repeating over and over again like a haunting refrain. She lay in her bed, staring up at the ceiling, her mind racing with the terror she had just experienced. But no matter how hard she tried to convince herself that it had all been a nightmare, she knew better. The field was alive, and something was calling to her. The next morning, despite the Graftons' warnings, Megan couldn't resist. She had to know what was hidden in the heart of the field. She needed to understand what had attacked her, what she had felt beneath the earth. She returned to the field, her body trembling as she stepped through the rows of corn once again. The sun was barely rising, the fog still thick in the air. As she walked deeper into the field, the heavy silence returned, but this time it felt different, more oppressive. It wasn't just the quiet. It was the weight of the land itself, pressing down on her, suffocating her with its secrets. Her eyes scanned the ground, and that's when she saw it. An ancient stone well, half buried beneath the tangled roots of the corn stalks. It was old, its stone surface worn and cracked by years of neglect. The ground around it was disturbed, as if something, or someone, had been digging, trying to claw its way out. Megan's breath caught in her throat as she moved closer to the well, her steps hesitant. The air around the well was heavy, thick with the smell of damp earth. She could feel the vibration in the ground, the hum that she had heard the night before, now stronger, more urgent. It seemed to pulse beneath her feet, drawing her in. The well seemed to beckon her, its shadowy depths swallowing the light of the early morning. Megan reached out, her fingers grazing the stone. She could feel the heat radiating from it, an unnatural warmth, as though the earth itself was burning beneath her touch. The hum grew louder, shaking her to the core. She had to know what lay inside. But before she could peer into the well, a shadow shifted at the corner of her vision. It emerged from the darkness, a figure so dark it seemed to absorb the light around it. Its form was constantly shifting, like smoke, twisting and warping into shapes that defied description. Megan tried to scream, but no sound came from her lips. She wanted to run, but her legs wouldn't move. It was as though the earth itself had taken hold of her, binding her in place. The figure slithered closer, its shape becoming more defined, more solid. It had a face, or at least something that resembled a face, a twisted mask of blackness with hollow eyes that seemed to stare into her very soul. Its mouth stretched open impossibly wide, revealing rows of sharp, jagged teeth that gleamed in the dim light. Megan's heart raced. She had to get away, but the figure moved faster than she could comprehend, its dark form closing the distance between them. With a primal scream, Megan turned and fled, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she ran toward the farmhouse. The figure didn't follow. It simply watched, standing at the edge of the field, its hollow eyes fixed on her as she ran. The first attack. That night, as the wind howled through the trees and the moon hung low in the sky, Megan couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The terror she had felt in the cornfield lingered in her bones, and every creak of the farmhouse seemed to carry with it the weight of unseen eyes watching her. She had just finished her evening chores when she noticed something out of place. The barn door was wide open. Megan froze, her blood running cold as she stared at the dark doorway. The barn had been securely locked just hours ago, and yet now it was wide open, its interior swallowed by shadow. She hadn't heard the door open, hadn't heard anything at all. Taking a deep breath, Megan approached the barn, her steps slow, deliberate. The smell of hay and animal musk filled the air, but it was the absence of sound that disturbed her most. There were no animals, no clucking chickens, no low bleating of the goats, just the dead silence that seemed to stretch on forever. And then she saw it. A figure standing in the doorway, tall and thin, with glowing yellow eyes that pierced the darkness like twin lanterns. Its body was human, but its limbs were twisted and contorted in unnatural angles. The creature's arms hung at its sides, long and spindly, and its legs were bent in ways that made Megan's stomach churn. It stood there, motionless, staring at her with its cold, predatory gaze. Megan's heart pounded in her chest as her body screamed for her to run, but her feet refused to move. The creature's eyes glowed brighter, and it took a step forward, its movements jerky and unnatural. Megan bolted. She ran as fast as she could, her breath coming in ragged gasps, but the creature's footsteps echoed behind her, growing louder with every step. It was chasing her, but it wasn't running. It was gliding, floating just inches above the ground. Megan stumbled toward the farmhouse, her pulse pounding in her ears. She reached the door and slammed it shut behind her, locking the bolt just as the creature's screech pierced the night. She collapsed against the door, her body trembling with fear, her mind racing with the impossibility of what she had just seen. But as she stood there, gasping for breath, she knew one thing for certain. The farm was no longer a place of peace. It was a place of darkness, of things that shouldn't be. The revelation. Megan stood at the edge of the farmhouse, her eyes scanning the fields that stretched out before her, the cornfield looming in the distance like a dark, sentient presence. The farm, which had once felt like a retreat, a quiet sanctuary away from the madness of her life in the city, now felt like a prison. Her every step seemed to echo in her mind, the weight of the strange occurrences growing heavier with each passing day. The night after her terrifying encounter with the creature at the barn, Megan couldn't shake the feeling that she was being hunted. There was an oppressive stillness in the air, a constant tension that made her skin crawl. She had not told the Graftons about the creature. She wasn't sure she could trust them anymore. But she knew, deep down, that she couldn't stay on this farm any longer without understanding the dark secret that it hid. The whispers of the land, the strange occurrences, and the silent, watchful eyes of the animals, they all pointed to something far more sinister than she could have imagined. In an attempt to unravel the truth, Megan visited the local library the next morning, hoping to find any hint of what was happening on the farm. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, but she needed to know. The librarian, An older woman with graying hair and a sharp gaze had watched her enter, eyes narrowing as Megan approached the counter. There was something strange about the way the woman looked at her, as though she recognized her in some way, but Megan couldn't place it. After a brief conversation, Megan was directed to the town's historical section, where dusty old books lined the shelves, their leather covers worn and cracked from age. As she flipped through a particularly old volume, her fingers traced over a chapter titled The Grafton Legacy. Megan's stomach churned as she began reading, her heart pounding with a mix of dread and curiosity. The Graftons had been in this town for generations, the book revealed. The farm had been passed down through the bloodline, each generation caring for the land and working its soil. But there was something darker beneath the surface of their history. The book detailed a series of disappearances and tragedies, all linked to the farm. The Graftons' caretakers had a disturbing habit. They disappeared, vanishing without a trace, or worse, they were driven mad by the land itself. Megan's fingers trembled as she turned the page, the words blurring in front of her eyes. The real horror, the book suggested, lay beneath the farm. The Graftons had made a pact with an entity, a dark, ancient creature that had been buried beneath the earth for centuries. It was a deal struck in desperation, one that bound their family to the land. The creature, a being that fed on souls, had promised the Graftons prosperity in exchange for their service as its wardens, keeping the land and its secrets hidden from the world. The caretaker who had gone mad, his name was John, and his madness had begun after he discovered something he shouldn't have. He had been the last one to try and leave the farm, but it was too late. The land, the creature beneath it, claimed him before he could escape. Megan closed the book, her pulse racing, the weight of the knowledge sinking in like a stone in her chest. The Graftons, it seemed, were not simply farmers. They were bound to this land by something far older and far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. This was no simple family farm. It was a prison, one that had kept the creature locked away for generations. But the wards were weakening and the creature was stirring again. And now Megan understood. The Graftons weren't just caretakers. They were the jailers, bound by blood to guard the entity beneath the earth. The Graftons' true nature. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Megan returned to the farmhouse with the weight of the revelation pressing down on her. The Graftons were sitting on the porch, sipping tea as if nothing had changed, but Megan could sense their tension. They knew she was different now, knew that she had uncovered something she wasn't meant to. Mr. Grafton's eyes flickered nervously as Megan approached. There was no warmth in his gaze now, only a flicker of something far darker, something she hadn't noticed before. Mrs. Grafton, too, seemed distant, her smile forced, her eyes darting around as if she were afraid of being watched. Megan took a deep breath and confronted them. "You're not just farmers," she said, her voice cold. "What are you really doing here? What have you done?" The Graftons exchanged a look, a brief, fleeting moment of understanding. Then, as if a decision had been made, Mr. Grafton set his tea down and stood up slowly, his long, thin fingers tapping nervously on the armrest of the chair. "You should not have gone to the library," he said quietly, his voice full of quiet regret. "You've learned too much. It was never meant for you to know." Megan felt a chill run down her spine. Her voice wavered, but she pushed forward, her fists clenched at her sides. "Tell me, what have you done to me, to all the others?" Mr. Grafton's face darkened. He opened his mouth to speak but hesitated as though the words were too heavy for him to bear. Finally, Mrs. Grafton spoke, her voice trembling with emotion. "We made a deal," she said softly. "A long time ago, before we even knew what we were dealing with. The creature beneath the farm, it's not just a monster. It's a force, an ancient entity that feeds on souls. We thought we could control it, that we could make it work for us, but it was a mistake." Megan's mind raced. "A mistake? You're telling me you've been keeping this thing here all these years, feeding its souls, for what?" "For power, mister," Grafton said bitterly, his eyes cold now. "For the farm, for wealth, for prosperity. It wasn't just about surviving, it was about thriving. The land has always been fertile, abundant, but it comes at a price. Every generation a caretaker must be sacrificed. Every generation someone has to give their soul." Mrs. Grafton's eyes welled with tears, but she wiped them away quickly. "We thought we could control it, but now it's too late. The creature is waking. It's not enough to just keep it buried. It wants more. And it's using you, Megan." Megan stumbled backward, her head spinning. "Using me? How?" "Mister." Grafton stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The creature is bound to the bloodline of our family, and now it's chosen you." Megan's chest tightened. "Chosen me. The deal we made all those years ago, Mrs." Grafton continued, her voice almost too quiet to hear. "It wasn't just about us. It was about keeping the creature in check. But you're different. Your blood is connected to the land in a way we didn't anticipate. You've been marked, Megan. You've been chosen to keep the creature in its prison. But if you fail, if you resist—" She didn't have to finish. Megan understood. If she didn't play along, the creature would break free, and the consequences would be worse than anything she could imagine. A family bound by darkness. Megan felt the weight of the Graftons' words settle on her like a shroud. They weren't just trapped on this farm, they were bound to it, chained by the very pact they had made. The farm wasn't just their livelihood, it was their prison. And now it was her prison too. She paced the room, her mind racing with fear and confusion. She wanted to leave, wanted to run far away from this place, but the truth was inescapable. She was part of it now. The bloodline, the curse, it was hers as much as it was theirs. Mrs. Grafton stood up slowly, her hands trembling as she reached out to Megan. "Please, you don't understand. The creature. It's more than just a monster. It's something old, something that predates time itself. It can't be controlled, not by us, not by anyone. And now it's too strong. It's calling to you." Megan took a step back. "I won't be part of this. I won't be part of your lies, your madness." But even as she spoke the words, she knew she was trapped. She had already been marked. The land, the blood, the creature, they had chosen her. The Graftons watched her, their eyes filled with sorrow and resignation. They had done what they could to protect her, but it wasn't enough. The creature was coming, and there was no way to stop it. "Don't fight it, Megan," Mr. Grafton said quietly. "The choice isn't yours anymore. You belong to this land now, just as we do, we all do." And as Megan stared at them, the weight of her fate settling in, she knew that the true horror of the farm wasn't just the creature below, but the family that had bound themselves to it. A family trapped in a cycle of sacrifice, a curse passed down through generations, feeding the darkness beneath. Megan closed her eyes, the truth sinking in. And now, there was no escape. The growing darkness. The days were no longer just passing on the Grafton farm. They were stretching into something else, something that defied the passage of time. Megan could feel it deep in her bones, as if the very land beneath her feet was slowly turning against her. At first, it had been subtle. The wind carried whispers she couldn't place, shadows moved when they shouldn't, and the animals, especially the goats, began to act in ways that were simply wrong. Their eyes, once dull and ordinary, had become sharp, almost predatory. Their gazes followed her wherever she went, their every movement calculated as if they were waiting for something. But it wasn't just the goats. Every creature on the farm was changing. The chickens were the first to make her feel truly uneasy. At dawn, when they should have been eager to eat, they remained still, huddled together in tight clusters, their eyes watching her, almost as if they were studying her. When she fed them, they rushed toward the food, not in a flurry of hunger but with a strange, calculated precision. They pecked at the ground, their beaks snapping in unison, as though moving to a rhythm only they could hear. It was the goats, however, that terrified her the most. Their bodies had grown unnaturally large, their muscles rippling beneath their fur. Their faces had changed, too. Their once soft features were now sharp, their teeth elongated into twisted fangs, gleaming in the low light of the morning. When they bleated, it wasn't the high-pitched sound she was used to, but something deeper, guttural, more like the growl of a wild animal. Their eyes glowed in the dark, bright and unblinking, and the more Megan watched them, the more she felt that they were not goats at all. They were something else, something waiting, and it wasn't just the animals. Megan noticed that even the trees in the forest surrounding the farm had begun to change. The trunks of the old oaks and maples seemed to be swelling, their bark cracking and peeling off in great chunks, revealing gnarled, twisted roots beneath. The branches, too, had begun to move unnaturally, swaying even when there was no breeze. And there was something about the way the leaves rustled, something almost alive. It was as though the entire farm, every living thing on it, was being drawn into a deepening, ancient darkness. At night, the shadows grew longer, and the air grew colder. Megan would sit in the farmhouse, staring out of the window at the field and the forest beyond, feeling as if something was watching her. The night was never truly silent. There was always the faint sound of something moving in the dark, the rustle of the trees, the crackling of the corn stalks as they swayed in the wind. But there was something else now, too. Something darker. A constant hum beneath the earth, low and vibrating like a heartbeat. It was the creature beneath the land, waking. Megan's dreams grew more vivid, more intense. She saw flashes of the past, glimpses of caretakers who had come before her. They were men and women, some of them young, others old, but they all had one thing in common. They had all gone mad. She saw them wandering the farm, their eyes wide with terror, their hands shaking as they muttered to themselves. She heard their screams in the night, heard the crackling of their minds breaking apart under the weight of the creature's influence. In one dream, she saw a man, his face twisted with horror, running through the cornfield, screaming for help. But the ground beneath him began to crack open, and the earth swallowed him whole, his body vanishing into the dark abyss beneath the field. In another dream, she saw a woman, her hair wild and unkempt, kneeling in front of the stone well in the middle of the cornfield, her hands pressed against the cold stone. She was whispering something, something Megan couldn't understand, but the look in her eyes said everything: despair, fear, resignation. Each of these visions left Megan shaken to her core. She had known that the Graftons had been hiding something, but she hadn't known how deep the darkness ran. The creature beneath the land wasn't just a monster, it was an ancient force, something that fed on fear, on madness, and it had been feeding for generations. The choice. It was that night, after another sleepless evening spent listening to the sounds of the farm, that Megan finally confronted the Graftons. She could feel the change in the air, the weight of the curse growing heavier with every passing hour. She had to know the truth, had to understand what was happening to her, to the farm, to the creatures that surrounded her. She waited until the Graftons were sitting together in the dimly lit kitchen, sipping their tea in silence. The room smelled of wood smoke and herbal tea, but there was something bitter beneath it all, something sharp. Megan stood at the doorway, her hands shaking as she gripped the frame. She couldn't put it off any longer. "I know what's happening," she said, her voice trembling. The Graftons didn't look surprised. They knew, too. They had known this moment would come. Megan stepped into the room, her heart pounding in her chest. "The creatures on this farm, they're changing. The animals, the trees, everything. I've seen it. I've felt it." Mrs. Grafton's face softened, but there was a sadness in her eyes that made Megan's stomach churn. "It's true," she said softly. "The farm is feeding again, the creature is awakening, and we have no way to stop it." Megan's breath caught in her throat. "But why me? Why did it choose me?" Mr. Grafton stood up slowly, his eyes hardening as he met her gaze. "It's not about choice, Megan. The creature beneath the land, it's older than anything you can imagine. It doesn't give you a choice. You've been marked by the land. Your blood is part of it now." Megan shook her head, confused. "Marked? I don't understand." "You're part of the bloodline, Mrs. Grafton explained, her voice heavy with the weight of what she was about to reveal. "The Graftons are the guardians of the farm, bound to it by the creature. Our family made a pact long ago. We agreed to keep the creature contained, to feed it, so long as we stayed in control. But the creature is clever. It finds a way to break free, to feed on the souls of those who come too close. The caretakers before you, Mr. Grafton continued, they were sacrifices. The creature needs one every generation, and when the last caretaker failed, it grew stronger. We've been feeding it with our own, trying to keep it contained. But now, Megan, the time has come for you to decide." Megan felt a chill run through her. "What do you mean?" "The creature offers you a deal, Mr. Grafton said, his voice low and dangerous. "You can leave, you can go, and you can take your family with you, but there's a price. You must offer someone else in your place, someone to keep the creature satisfied, to maintain the prison. You're the only one who can make that choice." Megan's mind spun. "What? You want me to sacrifice someone? You want me to?" "We have no choice, Mrs. Grafton said, her voice breaking. "It's the only way to keep the creature at bay. If you don't, if you refuse, the farm will fall, the creature will escape, and everything will be destroyed." Megan stumbled backward, her heart racing. She felt like she was suffocating. "I can't do that. I won't be part of this madness." "But you already are," Mr. Grafton replied. "You've been chosen by the land, and now you must choose. There is no escaping it, no running away." Megan's head spun, her vision blurring as the weight of the decision settled on her chest. She couldn't fathom the thought of sacrificing someone else. But the Graftons were right. She could feel the creature growing stronger with every passing moment, the dark energy beneath the earth rising, pressing against the surface of the land. The silence in the room was deafening. Megan's hand trembled as she reached for the door. She had to get out. She had to think. But as she stepped outside, the wind howled around her, and for the first time she felt the true weight of the curse pressing down on her. The creature was coming, and there was no escape. The decision was hers to make, and the land was watching. The entity's true form. Megan's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, each more terrifying than the last. The choice she had been given, the horrifying deal the Graftons had laid before her, kept echoing through her head. It felt as though the walls of the farmhouse had begun to close in on her, tightening around her chest with each passing minute. The whispers in the wind had only grown louder, the air thicker, pressing against her skin like a physical weight, and the creature beneath the land, The one the Graftons had been guarding for generations was stirring, growing stronger with every day. Megan knew that her time was running out. She had to know the truth. She couldn't wait any longer. The Grafton's secrets, the history of the farm, the terrifying power that had been buried beneath the earth, it all had to be uncovered. And so Megan made her decision. She would go into the cellar. The cellar, the one place that had been forbidden, the place where the Graftons had warned her never to go. She had heard them speaking in hushed voices about the cellar, always with a note of dread, always with fear in their eyes. They had tried to stop her, but the Graftons no longer had power over her. She had already crossed the line, had already begun to unravel the mystery that bound her to this place. Megan made her way through the darkened farmhouse, the floorboards creaking under her feet as though the house itself were alive. The air was heavy, thick with an ancient presence, like the farm had been holding its breath for centuries. The stairs to the cellar were narrow and steep, the stone steps worn smooth by time and use. At the bottom, the door loomed, old and weathered, its hinges rusted from years of disuse. She hesitated for only a moment before she reached for the handle and twisted. The door creaked open with a groan, and a sudden chill swept through the air, like the breath of something long buried. As she stepped into the darkness, the smell hit her, musty, dank, the scent of decay. The walls of the cellar seemed to close in on her, the shadows swallowing the dim light from the candle she carried. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she pressed forward. At the far end of the cellar, in the deepest corner, she saw it. The creature. It was a mass of shifting limbs, eyes, and tendrils, its form constantly warping, stretching, and contracting, as if it could not decide what shape it should take. It was a nightmare made flesh, its body a writhing mass of appendages, its many eyes opening and closing in grotesque patterns, each one seeming to stare directly at her, as if it had been waiting for her, watching her all along. Megan froze, her breath catching in her throat. The creature was both terrifying and beautiful in its own twisted way, its movements fluid and hypnotic. Its many tendrils swayed and curled as though they were testing the air, searching for something to latch onto. The creature's form shifted again, its limbs elongating, its eyes widening, and for a brief moment Megan saw its true shape. A creature from the depths of nightmares, a being that should never have existed. It spoke then, its voice a low, guttural rumble that seemed to vibrate the very air around her. "Megan," it hissed, its voice both ancient and timeless. "I have been waiting for you. You are my chosen one." Megan's heart raced, panic rising in her chest. She knew what the creature was offering. She could feel its power thrumming in the air around her, the promise of strength, of control. "You can have everything you desire," the creature continued, its voice like a serpent's whisper. "Join me, serve as my warden, become my guardian, and I will give you the power to rule this land, to bend it to your will." Megan stood frozen, every part of her body screaming to run, to escape this nightmare. The power the creature offered was unimaginable, power beyond anything she had ever dreamed of. She could feel the temptation of it, the pull, the promise of everything she could ever want. But there was a darkness to it, something insidious that made her sick to her stomach. "I will not serve you," Megan said, her voice trembling but resolute. "I will not become your warden." The creature's many eyes narrowed and a low growl rumbled from deep within its shifting mass. "You refuse?" it asked, its voice dripping with malice. "You dare defy me? I have been bound beneath this earth for centuries, held captive by the Graftons and their bloodline. But you, Megan, you are different. You have the blood. You have the power to break free." Megan's mind reeled. The creature had been trapped beneath the earth, feeding on souls, bound by the Grafton's pact. And now it was offering her a chance to break the chains that held it, to release it back into the world. She could feel the weight of that decision bearing down on her. The creature's power was irresistible, but at what cost? "No," she said again, her voice firmer this time. "I will not free you." The creature let out a hiss of frustration, its tendrils lashing out, snapping at the air around her. "You think you have a choice?" it snarled. "You are already mine. The land has claimed you, Megan. You cannot escape it." And with that, the cellar door slammed shut behind her. The escape attempt. Megan's breath came in shallow gasps as she ran up the stairs from the cellar, the sound of her footsteps echoing in the stillness. The creature's voice still rang in her ears, its words twisting in her mind. It was right about one thing: she couldn't escape. Not anymore. She bolted for the door, but as she reached the front steps, a sudden heaviness seemed to fall over her. The air around her thickened, and the ground beneath her feet trembled. The earth groaned as if it were alive, as if it were reaching up to hold her in place. Megan froze, her heart hammering in her chest. The sunflowers were shifting in the distance, their petals bending and twisting, their heads turning to follow her every move. The trees, too, were moving slowly but unmistakably, the branches creaking and swaying as if they were reaching toward her, blocking her path. "No," Megan whispered, her voice trembling with panic. "No, no, no." She turned, looking toward the gate, but the way was blocked. The land was closing in on her, trapping her. The sunflowers swayed like an ocean of twisted faces, their petals curling into snarls, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. The trees seemed to bend toward her, their twisted limbs reaching out like claws, trapping her in the farm's grip. A scream rose in her throat, but before it could escape, she heard the rustling of the cornfield behind her. She turned just in time to see the goats emerge from the field, their eyes glowing with an eerie light, their bodies unnaturally large. They moved toward her in a slow, deliberate crawl, their mouths open in a silent snarl. The chickens followed, their beady eyes locked onto her, their low, clucking sounds growing louder, more frantic. They surrounded her, their bodies shifting and growing, becoming more monstrous with every passing second. Megan's body trembled as she backed away, but there was nowhere to go. The land had claimed her. The Graftons had warned her, and now it was too late. The creatures of the farm had turned on her, and the land itself was coming alive, responding to the entity beneath the earth. She had refused the creature's offer, but in doing so she had sealed her fate. There was no escaping the farm now. Megan turned and ran, her legs carrying her as fast as they could, but the ground beneath her seemed to rise up to meet her, holding her in place. The sunflowers, the trees, the animals, they were all part of it, all part of the land, and the land was alive. The entity had claimed her, and there would be no escape. Not for her, not for anyone. The battle for survival. The wind howled through the trees, a monstrous cry that seemed to echo the pain of the land itself. Megan stood at the edge of the field, the once familiar landscape now twisted, distorted by the influence of the creature that had been buried beneath the earth for so long. The farm, which had once been a place of peace and simplicity, had become something else, something monstrous. The very air around her was thick with the stench of decay and death, and the shadows seemed to stretch longer than they should, reaching toward her like hungry hands. The Graftons, once her employers, now stood beside her, their faces grim, their eyes darkened by the weight of their curse. The truth was out now, the dark pact that had bound their family to the land for generations. The creature beneath the earth, the one that had promised them power, had finally come to collect its price. and it was no longer content to remain hidden. It was rising, clawing its way out, and it was taking everything with it. Megan's heart pounded in her chest as she looked at the Graftons. They were all that remained of the family bound to this place, the last line of defense between the creature and the outside world. And they were just as trapped as she was. There was no escaping the horrors that had been unleashed. "We can't run," Mr. Grafton said, his voice hollow as if he, too, had realized the futility of their situation. "The land won't let us. We've spent our whole lives trying to contain it, but now—" Mrs. Grafton's eyes were filled with regret, her hands trembling as she clutched her husband's arm. "We never should have made that deal," she whispered. "It's too late now." The farm around them was beginning to disintegrate, the earth trembling beneath their feet. The trees groaned as though in pain, their branches twisting and bending unnaturally, the once firm ground cracking open, revealing the blackness beneath. The sunflowers that had once been a silent sentinel now swayed erratically, their petals curling inward as if to shield themselves from the growing darkness. Megan looked toward the barn, its silhouette barely visible in the shifting shadows. The creatures that had once been the animals of the farm, the goats, the chickens, the dogs, were now twisted and monstrous, their bodies contorted in grotesque shapes. Their eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and they moved with an unnatural speed, their limbs snapping and jerking as if they were controlled by some unseen force. They were no longer animals. They were vessels for the creature's influence, its army of corruption. But it wasn't just the animals that were changing. The very land itself was warping, its reality twisting and shifting in ways that defied comprehension. Megan felt the ground beneath her feet shift, as if it were alive, pulling her into its depths. The air crackled with an unnatural energy, and the sky above them darkened, turning an ominous shade of red, like the final breath of a dying world. "We can't stop this," Megan said, her voice breaking as she turned to face the Graftons. "The creature is too strong, it's too late." But Mr. Grafton shook his head. "There's always a way. There has to be. This farm is our curse, but it's also our prison, if we can just—" He didn't finish his sentence because the ground trembled beneath them again, and the earth itself seemed to open up in a gaping maw. The dark form of the creature emerged from the depths, its shifting limbs stretching toward the sky, its eyes glowing with hunger. The creature's many eyes locked onto Megan, its voice a low, guttural growl that vibrated the air around them. "You have defied me," the creature hissed, its voice like 1,000 whispers in her mind. "You cannot escape me, Megan. I am the land. I am the darkness beneath it." Megan stumbled backward, her mind racing. She could feel the power of the creature growing stronger with every passing second. The land was shifting, its reality bending to the will of the entity beneath it. There was no more running, no more hiding. The creature had already claimed the land, and now it was coming for her, for all of them. She turned to Derek, who had been standing quietly at the edge of the field, his face pale and drawn. The horror of the situation was clear in his eyes, but there was something else there too, a flicker of determination. He stepped toward her, his hand reaching out to take hers. "We need to fight," Derek said, his voice steady. "We can't let it win." But Megan shook her head, her heart heavy with the weight of the knowledge she had learned. "We're out of time, Derek. The creature is too strong. We can't fight it. We can't stop it." But Derek didn't back down. "We have to try. We're the last line of defense. The Graftons may have been its wardens, but we're the only ones left to stop it. We can't let it destroy everything." Megan hesitated, her mind a whirlwind of fear and doubt. She wanted to believe him, wanted to think that there was a way out, a way to defeat the creature. But the truth was, she had already made the decision in her heart. The only way to end this, to contain the creature once and for all, was to sacrifice herself. The ultimate choice. The creature was closing in on them, its twisted limbs stretching toward the earth, its dark eyes glowing with a malevolent hunger. The land trembled beneath their feet, and the sky above them darkened even further, as if the very heavens were being swallowed by the darkness below. Megan could feel the weight of the creature's power pressing down on her, could feel the pull of the earth, the land, the curse that had been passed down through the generations. She turned to Derek, her eyes filled with sorrow and regret. "There's no way to stop it," she whispered. "The creature has already won. It has control over everything, over the land, over us. The only way to stop it is for me to bind myself to the land, to take the creature's place." Derek's face went white. "No, Megan, you can't. There has to be another way." But Megan shook her head, her heart breaking. "There isn't. I've seen it in my visions. The creature feeds on souls, and it will destroy everything unless it has a new warden, a new guardian, and that has to be me." Tears welled in Derek's eyes, but Megan took his hand, squeezing it tightly. "I love you, Derek. I always will. But this is the only way. If I don't do this, it will escape, and it will destroy everything." Derek's grip tightened on her hand, but he knew deep down that she was right. There was no other choice. With a final, heart-wrenching look, Megan turned toward the creature, whose many eyes were fixed on her, waiting for her decision. The ground trembled beneath her, the land pulling her closer to the earth as if it was drawing her into its depths. Megan closed her eyes and took a deep breath, her heart heavy with the weight of the sacrifice she was about to make. "I bind myself to the land," Megan whispered, her voice steady, though her heart ached with the knowledge of what she was about to give up. "I offer my soul to contain the creature, to keep it buried, to keep it locked away." The creature's eyes glowed brighter, its form shifting and rippling with dark energy. It roared in triumph as Megan's words echoed across the farm, the land shaking with the power of the curse. And then everything went dark. Megan felt the earth pull her down, felt the weight of the land, the power of the creature, sink into her very soul. She could feel herself becoming part of the land, part of the curse, her body bound to the earth beneath her. But even as the darkness closed in, she knew she had made the right choice. The creature would remain locked away, trapped beneath the earth for eternity. As the last remnants of the creature's influence faded, the land began to settle, the trembling earth finally stilling. The sky above them cleared, the red haze dissipating as the sun broke through the clouds. Megan had saved them all, but at what cost? Megan's fate. The ground beneath Megan's feet felt both alien and familiar. The earth, once warm and alive with the vibrancy of life, had become a prison, a cold, silent guardian that had swallowed her very essence. Her soul was no longer her own, bound to the land that had birthed the creature, to the very soil that had nurtured the curse for generations. The creature was sealed, buried once more beneath the earth, but at what cost? Megan could feel the weight of her decision in every breath she took, in every step she made. The land had claimed her, and now she was its warden. The farm around her was silent, the usual cacophony of animal sounds absent. The goats no longer bleated, the chickens no longer clucked, even the wind seemed to have stilled as if holding its breath. The world had become eerily quiet, and for the first time since she arrived, Megan felt truly alone. She had expected peace after making her sacrifice, after binding herself to the land in order to contain the creature. But peace was an illusion, a fragile mask that barely hid the truth of her fate. The creature, though sealed beneath the earth, had left its mark on her. Its power lingered in her veins, thrumming beneath her skin, a constant reminder of what she had done. The power of the land of the creature now flowed through her, and she could feel it shaping her very being, twisting her thoughts, her desires. The Graftons were gone. Derek was gone. They had all left one way or another. The creature had consumed them, their souls either devoured by the entity or shattered by the madness it had sown. Megan was the last to remain, the last line of defense against the power that lay beneath the farm. And though the creature was sealed, it was not gone. It still lurked in the deepest recesses of the earth, waiting, always waiting. Megan wandered through the fields, the tall, once pristine rows of corn now withered and twisted, their stalks gnarly and crooked, like the gnarled fingers of some ancient beast. The sunflowers, too, seemed different, darker, their petals curled inward as if hiding from the world. Their faces were no longer turned to the sky, no longer following the sun. They, too, seemed to be watching her, their empty eyes following her every movement, their silent vigil a constant reminder of her new role. She could feel the whispers in the wind, the voices of the past that had once filled the air with fear and despair. The voices of the caretakers who had come before her, the ones who had been consumed by the curse, who had been driven mad by the creature's influence. She could hear their cries, their pleas for mercy, their desperate attempts to escape, but they were nothing more than echoes now, ghosts trapped within the land, bound by the same curse that now held her. She had tried to resist the pull of the land, but it was futile. The farm had claimed her, and now she was its keeper, its warden. She could feel the weight of its power in every step she took, in every breath she drew. The creature was gone, but it was not forgotten. Its presence lingered, always there, always watching. Megan was its warden now, its protector, its jailer. The land had given her power, immense, unimaginable power, but it had also taken from her everything that she had once been. She was no longer just Megan Adams, the young artist seeking peace. She was something else now, something bound to the land, bound to the creature that had lived beneath it for centuries. The vigil of the warden. The days blurred together in a haze of silence. Megan had taken to walking the fields, her footsteps soft and deliberate, her eyes always turned to the horizon, always scanning the land. The farm had become her domain, her prison, and she had no choice but to watch over it. The creature was sealed, but she knew it was only a matter of time before it tried to break free again. It always did. As the seasons changed, so too did the land. The crops grew in twisted, unnatural patterns, their growth stunted and warped, as though the earth itself had lost its vitality. The animals had long since disappeared, leaving behind only the hollow echoes of their existence. The once lush fields were now barren, their beauty marred by the rot that seemed to fester beneath the surface. The sunflowers, once symbols of warmth and life, now stood as hollow sentinels, their faces turned toward the earth as though in mourning. Megan could feel the weight of the curse pressing down on her, suffocating her. She was the warden, but she was also a prisoner. The creature beneath the earth had been sealed, but its influence still hung heavy in the air. It whispered to her in the silence of the night, its voice low and insistent, promising power, offering freedom. But Megan had learned the hard way that the creature's promises were lies. Its power came at a cost, and that cost was more than she was willing to pay. One evening, as the sun began to set, casting a fiery glow over the fields, Megan stood at the edge of the farm, gazing out at the horizon. The sky was a deep crimson, the last light of the day casting long shadows across the land. She could feel the pull of the earth beneath her feet, the weight of the land's power thrumming through her body. It was in her blood now, coursing through her veins like fire. And as the darkness settled over the farm, she knew that the creature would never truly be gone. The whispers in the wind grew louder, more insistent. She could hear them now, voices rising from the depths of the earth calling her name. Megan, Megan, the creature's voice echoed in her mind, its tone seductive, coaxing her to break the chains that bound her, to release it from its prison. But Megan stood firm, her feet planted in the soil, her hands clenched at her sides. She would not let it win. She had made her choice, and she would stand vigil over the land until the end of time if she had to. As the last light of the day faded into the night, Megan walked through the fields, her eyes glowing with the power of the land. The creatures may have been sealed, but the darkness was still there, lurking beneath the surface. She was the warden now, and her task was clear. She would watch, she would wait, and she would never let the creature escape again. The farm was quiet, but the whispers of the past lingered in the wind, their voices faint but persistent, like a haunting melody that would never fade. Megan knew that the land would never truly be at peace. The creature beneath the earth would always be waiting, always watching. And she would be there, always watching, always waiting, the last line of defense against the darkness that had once threatened to consume them all. In the silence of the night, Megan stood alone, her soul bound to the land, her fate sealed by the creature she had freed. The farm was quiet now, but the whispers would never stop. The creature's hunger would never be fully satisfied, and the land would never be free. And Megan would never be free. The tale of Megan Adams is one of sacrifice, horror, and the consequences of choices made under the weight of impossible circumstances. The Grafton farm, a seemingly quiet and peaceful place, turned into a dark prison for those who dared to uncover its secrets. Megan, initially seeking solace and escape from the pressures of the world, unknowingly became entangled in a curse that had plagued the Grafton family for generations. As the story unfolds, we see Megan's transformation from a hopeful outsider to a reluctant warden, trapped not only by the land, but by the ancient, malevolent force beneath it. The creature that lay beneath the farm, feeding on souls and controlling the Grafton bloodline, was more than just a monster. It represented a cycle of power and manipulation that had been passed down through the generations. The Grafton's pact with this dark entity seemed to offer prosperity and safety, but it came at a horrifying cost. Megan, though initially unwilling, found herself bound to the very land she had hoped to escape, her fate sealed by the creature's insidious power. In the end, Megan's decision to sacrifice herself to the land in order to contain the creature was a moment of profound selflessness. Yet, it also underscored a painful truth. Her battle was not only against the creature, but against the very system that had bound her to it. The sacrifice she made wasn't just for the survival of others, but also to prevent the creature's return, even though it meant giving up her own future, her own freedom. The choice between escaping the nightmare and becoming part of it was one that she could not avoid, as the power of the land and the creature had already laid its claim on her. As Megan walks through the now silent farm, her soul tethered to the land, her eyes glowing with the entity's power, it's clear that the farm's curse is far from over. The whispers of the past, the echoes of the other caretakers who had gone mad or vanished, linger in the air. Megan's ultimate sacrifice ensures that the creature remains sealed, but it also leaves her a prisoner, eternally bound to the land. The silence of the farm is broken only by the whispers of those who came before her, whose fate she now shares. From Megan's story, we can draw a powerful lesson about the choices we make, the sacrifices we must sometimes endure, and the consequences of our actions. Megan's tale is not only a horror story, but also a reflection on the weight of responsibility, the darkness that can consume us when we try to outrun our past, and the price of holding on to power at the cost of our humanity. In our own lives, we are often faced with choices that feel like they are impossible to make. We are drawn into situations where the cost of escape is high, and the price of our actions can feel overwhelming. Yet, the truth is, every choice we make, whether it's to stay in a toxic relationship, remain in a job that drains us, or continue on a path we know isn't right, can bind us in ways we never expected. Megan's fate is a reminder that some choices come with irrevocable consequences, and sometimes the cost of our decisions isn't fully realized until it's too late. But the story also reminds us of the power of self-sacrifice and how it can sometimes be the only way to break the cycles that trap us. Megan's ultimate act of selflessness was a painful one, but it was also the one that broke the cycle of the creature's terror. In life, we may not always have the option of escape, but we can choose how we face our fears and the burdens placed upon us. We can choose to confront the darkness, to stand against it, and sometimes we may even need to sacrifice a part of ourselves in the process to save others or stop the cycle of suffering. What do you think about Megan's ultimate decision? Was she right to sacrifice herself for the greater good? How do you feel about the choices she made, knowing the costs involved? We'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions. Please share them in the comments section below and let's start a conversation. Your perspective may help others understand the depth of the choices we all face in our own lives. And if you enjoyed this story and want to support more chilling tales like this, make sure to subscribe to Whispers in the Dark. Your support gives us the motivation to keep creating more content that sends shivers down your spine. Don't miss the next installment of our spine-tingling stories.